Thank you for clicking on the video, and I hope everyone is doing really well. I've mentioned in previous videos that I struggle with bipolar disorder. I've made videos basically explaining what bipolar is and the misconceptions around bipolar disorder. In one of my videos, I talked briefly about how I have never been traditionally treated for bipolar disorder. I've never taken medication specifically for my bipolar disorder, and I've never been to therapy for my bipolar disorder. So today I'm going to be talking about how I manage my bipolar disorder without the use or the aid of traditional treatment. I want to take a quick flashback to my childhood, and I've talked about my childhood a million and one times. I look back now and I recognize that I was a very angry child, and that translated into my behavior. So I would go from the most angelic, peaceful, well-behaved kid and just snap and switch in a blink of an eye, and I would become the devil itself. Like, I was out of control when I would have this switch, and it really scared me as a kid, and it always really frustrated because I couldn't put my finger on why this was happening, and I just sort of went with it, and I kind of just behaved erratically, and I was all over the place. I was very violent as a child. Little side note, I've been watching a lot of Dr. Phil lately, and they always like little clips on YouTube, and there's a lot of episodes where they have out of control children, where these children are just like violent and the parents are scared that the child is going to kill their other siblings. That was me. Like, I was that out of control 8-year-old who, I made my sister bleed. I bit her. I punched her. We'd punch each other. We were both kind of violent towards each other, but I admit it, I was extreme. I would bite her to the point of bleeding. I would pull her hair out. I would just fight, and I would fight with everyone, and it would be out of nowhere, and it would be caused by practically nothing. But this would happen. It was never really looked into as a child. It was later in my teens that things were more addressed, and things, we delved deeper into my psychological misfortunes and figured things out. And I figured things out on my own, really contemplating and really meditating and really digging deep into my childhood, my experiences, my background, all those things. But that was me as a kid. I was an angel. I was like the perfect angel, but I was also the most horrible devil ever. Later on in high school, I was diagnosed with depression, and that later turned out to be a misdiagnosis, which is the case for a lot of people with bipolar disorder. A lot of the time they are misdiagnosed because bipolar disorder shares a lot of similarity traits to other mental illnesses, and so the person is usually, if they are misdiagnosed, they're misdiagnosed because they're exhibiting those traits of those other mental disorders, and the bipolar disorder is kind of not thought, I don't want to say not thought of, but the traits that are being exhibited are just stronger. So at the time of me being diagnosed with depression, I was exhibiting an extreme depressive episode because of my bipolar. You go through states of extreme depression and then manic, and every single time I would go to the doctor, for whatever reason, I was always in a depressive state. And probably the reason why I would go to the doctor more at those times is because depressive states scared me, and they were just so strong and just so apparent. And so when I would get super depressed, super suicidal, all of those things, I'd go to the doctor. I'd go to treatment, I'd go to therapy, treatment and such. But it was never, my manic episodes were very scarce, but they were present. But I was more aware of the depressive state. The first thing a doctor does when you're diagnosed with depression is you're put on antidepressants. And I was put on an antidepressant that is very specific to depression. It is not catered to bipolar disorder. So I'm being medicated for a disorder I don't even technically have. I couldn't figure out why why my medication wasn't doing exactly what I was told it was supposed to be doing. It kind of felt, there were days where I'd be like, oh yeah, I feel so great, the medication's working. Newsflash, I was just manic at those points. It wasn't necessarily the medication, it was just my chemical imbalance in my brain going up and down and going crazy. And there were days like that where I was so sure the medication was working, and then all of a sudden I would just drop, and I would get super depressed, and I couldn't figure out, well, why is this happening? I'm supposed to be happy all the time because I'm taking magic pills. And then there were days where I would take the pill and it was literally like nothing changed. It was just a thing I did. I took a pill in the morning and that was the end of it. And it really didn't have an effect on my life. When you're already bipolar and you're all up and down and all over the place, and then you're being medicated improperly, it really messes with that up and down. And so it almost becomes more severe, and it turned into, I would go manic and I would feel like, oh my gosh, I don't need my medication. And that's such a cliche, but yep, go off the meds and then drop, get depressed, get suicidal. I guess I need to go back on my medication. I gotta take my therapy more seriously, do all that, get manic again, off the meds, back to depressed, back on the meds. So it was just a roller coaster, this vicious cycle of just going around and around, up and down, and just really not getting anywhere, because that's what a cycle is. You don't progress. You're just going around and around and around, and sometimes you're here and sometimes you're here, and then it's just not fun. So eventually, many years later, I want to say almost four years after my diagnosis with depression, I found out, you don't have depression, you're just severely bipolar. And for a long time, I denied it. I was in a state of denial, and I refused to learn anything about bipolar disorder. In my mind, bipolar disorder was like crazy of the crazies, like one of the like most insane you could be. Not the most, but it was up there, because there's a lot of statistics about bipolar disorder. And I didn't want that to be me, and I didn't want to be sick, and I didn't want to be incapable, and I didn't want to be dependent on anyone or anything. I really just wanted to be free. And so I just denied the fact that I was bipolar, and I would just tell people I was depressed, because that's a little bit more accepted, and people are always saying, well, everyone's a little depressed, so it's no big deal. So it was no big deal. I wanted to make it seem like it was no big deal. I was no big deal. I wasn't a burden on anyone, and I didn't want to feel like a burden. So I just made some really bad life decisions because I wasn't addressing the big problem, which was my mental health. So if you ever hear about the super severe cases of bipolar disorder, a lot of people who are untreated and they just kind of go off the deep end and they get into like really hard drugs, and they drink a lot, party a lot, run with bad people, all of those good things, those wonderful things. Well, they're doing it because it's their way of medicating. If they are diagnosed, and in my case, I knew I had bipolar disorder. I was aware of the situation, but I didn't want people to know, in the sense that I would be, properly medicated, properly treated. I didn't want that. So I just thought, if I ignore it, I'll be fine. But when you ignore a problem, then it gets bigger, and the consequences get bigger. And I started doing all the things that a person who's in denial about their mental state of being will do. And it was just kind of a way, the things I did were ways of staying in denial and forgetting that I had this big problem and I could just be normal. But I mean, drugs and alcohol can only make you feel normal for a second, and then reality comes back, and you have to deal with it, or you have to take more drugs and drink more. And so that's what I did for a long time, is just I guess, self-medicated in a way, just trying to ignore the problem and just not have to face it. Eventually, I got to a point where I had to look in the mirror and be like, I'm bipolar. That's what I am. I'm either out of control with bipolar, like I'm out of control denying my bipolar, or I'm out of control accepting my bipolar. It was kind of, that's not really the truth, but that's how I saw it. And so I thought it's better to take care of my physical well-being, stop drinking, stop doing drugs, stop, all the bad behavior. It's better to end all that and just be crazy because I have a mental problem. That just, it had to be. And that is what I did at first. I just realized that I have a mental issue and I'm creating bigger problems because I'm not focused on that mental problem. I'm ignoring it. So I need to start facing it, and I need to figure out what I need to do to manage it, make myself able to live life. I was put off by medication in general, and I just kind of came to a place in my lifestyle, just the way I was focused on my general health. I really tried to avoid medication of any kind. I came to the decision that I wasn't going to be medicated. I was not going to go on meds for bipolar disorder. The thing about bipolar disorder is it's one of the mental disorders that must be medicated because you most likely will go on mood stabilizers, which helps your body and your mind work together to control your depressive and your manic episodes. I decided that I was strong enough and I am capable enough to do that on my own. So there are people who they need to be medicated. They need to be on medication for bipolar disorder. For whatever reason, I don't. I have something in my brain that I'm able to recognize and rationalize my episodes. And that is how I manage my bipolar disorder without medication, without therapy, and I do it on my own, kind of. First of all, it's not easy to manage my bipolar disorder on my own. It's not easy at all. And it was really hard at first because when you're manic, you don't know that you're manic. You just know that you feel good. And when you're depressed, you don't really know that you're depressed, but you're more focused on the fact, like the feelings of being depressed rather than the fact that you're depressed. And so it took a lot of practice, a lot of patience, and a lot of messing up to come to a point where I started to not only recognize what episode I was in, but I started to recognize the signs that I was transitioning into manic or depressive. And so eventually, and this doesn't happen every time, but eventually I can catch myself and I can basically talk myself through the fact that you are entering a depressive state. You've been here before. You are going to get out of it. You're going to feel better eventually. You just have to remember that this is not forever. This feeling of sadness is not taking over your life. And there are some times where I still get trapped and I still get stuck and I still get really, really depressed and I'm stuck in it and I don't feel like I can pull myself out. But there's always something in the back of my mind. And I think I've trained my mind to always have that little, maybe it's my conscience, I don't know, but that little voice that's like telling me that it's going to be okay. So I've just really been able to train my brain, train myself to really become self-aware. And it's really hard for people with severe mental health issues and especially bipolar disorder, to not only become self-aware, but take the steps to become so self-aware. But I think that is the crucial thing, the crucial factor that you need to do if you really want to be able to help yourself without medication. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not a professional, and I'm not saying go off your meds or whatnot. I think you need to get to a point where you are stable enough in your own confidence to be able to do this. And I don't know why, but I just told my brain you're strong enough, and I did it. But like I said, it wasn't easy. It's still not easy. It's a hard work. It's a lot of hard work, and I don't always do it right, but I can eventually get to a point where I'm very aware and able to recognize what episode, current state I am in. You have to be doubly strong, doubly vigilant, doubly willing to just dive in headfirst into your brain and really just dig deep and find a way to live and survive. If you know you don't want to be on meds, you have to put in the time, and you have to be willing to ask for help when you need help. And that's the other big thing is, while I don't go to therapy, I have a loving, supportive group around me of family and friends who listen, put up with my crazy, and are always there to love me and support me. And so they're like my therapy. And so I don't go to traditional therapy, but I have some form of therapy. So you always have to make sure you have those loving, supporting people around you who you can count on and lean on. Even when you feel like you're totally alone, you always have those people, and you have to be willing to accept their help and their love, even when it's really, really hard. People need meds. There are people who do. They just do, and that's fine. That is how you manage your bipolar. That's how you manage your mental illness or whatever it is you struggle with. That's how you manage it, is through prescription medication. It's through therapy. It's through doctor's visits. It's through those things. It's doing what you need to do to have a healthy mental health. And this is what I do. It's just different. It's just a different way of doing it. And I just wanted to share that with you of how I do it. And yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up for more videos about eating disorders, diets, eating disorder recovery, mental health, and all that good stuff. Please subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye!